and welcome to my YouTube channel, Living an Unlived Life. This is the 5th video in my Mindset Reset Challenge series, which came about when, in late 2024, I decided to radically change my life by making not one, but a whopping 52 New Year's resolutions. If this is the first time you've watched one of my videos, you can find the introduction to this series here. On the face of it, this particular challenge might sound as if it is quite simple. Ride my off-road motorcycle, a 2020 Yamaha XT250, up Mount Coree, which lies some 50 kilometres away on the border between the Australian Capital Territory and the surrounding state of New South Wales. The entire region, which has an extensive network of gravel trails, is a paradise for local off-road motorcycle riders, although the track up Mount Coree has a reputation for being somewhat demanding of skills and courage. To be honest, ever since hearing about it, I'd always wanted to do it, while simultaneously being terrified at the idea because the ride isn't quite as simple as it sounds. But then, late last year, when I was putting together my list, it was one of the first activities that I wrote down. I just had to find the courage to do it. I learned to ride a motorcycle 5 years ago, starting with the Harley-Davidson Street 500, on which I rode some 40,000 kilometres, as far north as Rockhampton in Queensland and as far south as the bottom of Tasmania. Then, 3 years ago, I decided that I wanted to learn to ride a dirt bike, so I purchased a second-hand Yamaha XT250, which I'd found in Dubbo, and which only had 600 kilometres on the clock. Then, because I am so short, I had to have the seat cut down and the suspension lowered so I could get both feet firmly flat on the ground. A few months later, I did a local one-day off-road training course, then started to ride in the nearby forests with a woman I'd met on the course. 3 years later, we still ride dirt together, which we both enjoy immensely. 2 years ago, I went on a 2-day ladies-only off-road course, which was held on a bush property on the New South Wales south coast, and where I learned just how much I didn't know about off-road riding. There's lots of advantages to riding dirt back roads on a trail bike. Firstly, a dirt bike is much easier and cheaper to maintain as there are less electronics to malfunction, and much of the regular servicing, such as replacing air filters and carrying out oil changes, can be done at home. Secondly, small trail bikes are, of course, much easier to handle than their bigger road bike cousins. My XT is only about 120 kilograms, whereas my big Harley-Davidson Sport Glide weighs about 330 kilograms, which is, for me, a fair weight to manoeuvre at low speeds. Finally, there's the fact that an off-road motorcycle can take you to some wonderful natural places that are not readily accessible by car. However, there are some disadvantages to off-road riding. Firstly, the skill level needed to ride a dirt bike is much higher than riding on tar roads. If you are scooting along on a flat on a well-graded two-wheel drive dirt road, there's nothing much to worry about, except the occasional kangaroo hopping out. But if you want to go on more mountainous trails, the tracks can sometimes be very boggy, very rough, and very steep. Secondly, there's the fact that sometimes you have to ride long distances on tar to get to the dirt road, and small off-road bikes aren't great to ride on the highway at anything above about 80 kilometres an hour. Thirdly, when riding in rough conditions, it's easy to drop the bike in tricky situations, and while this is usually at low speed, the catch is to not get hurt in the fall, especially if the bike drops on top of you. I've dropped my off-road bike at least 20 times and fortunately only sustained a few lacerations and bruising from the serrated metal foot pegs. And while I've had a lesson in how to pick up my off-road bike and used to have the strength to do it, frustratingly it seems that I've lost that capacity over the last few years. Finally, unless we're riding on well-graded dirt roads that are commonly frequented by other riders, it's unwise to ride solo. Many riders carry satellite communication devices, such as personal locator beacons, but there's no better feeling when an accident happens than having another rider there to help you. Over the last 5 years, I've belonged to a few different motorcycle groups: the Harley Owners Group, or HOG as it is known, the Canberra BMW Club, and, more recently, the Canberra branch of the Ulysses Club, which caters to older motorcycle riders. Through Ulysses, I'd met Bob, who'd recently bought a Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 and had been busy exploring the maze of dirt roads in the region on his own. We teamed up to do a few rides together in the Brindabella Ranges to the west and in the Talaganda region to the east. When I put it to him that we ride up Mount Coree, he was keen to come with me. Bob and I live on opposite sides of Canberra, so we meet at 9 a.m. at the Cotta picnic area. After talking over our route to Mount Coree, we headed up through the Uriara Twisties to turn left at Uriara Station on Brindabella Road. While this road is a much shorter alternative route between Canberra and Tumut, because about half the distance is unsealed, it takes about the same amount of time to travel. However, because the road is very wide and easy to drive, it's popular with four-wheel drive enthusiasts, so most of the corners are rough washboard and it can be very dusty travelling on a motorbike if it hasn't rained for a while. Just after the dirt section started, we turned right into Curry's Road, which is a reasonable four-wheel drive forestry track that leads up to the top of the ridge, where it ends at a junction with Two Sticks Road, the main track that runs along the Brindabella Ridge. We turned right and followed Two Sticks until its junction with the Coree Summit Road, then turned right again. A few hundred metres down the road, we stopped at the Coree campground to take a break and talk about our assault on the summit. While the camping area is quite sheltered with big trees all around, it was windy, and clearly it was going to be very windy at the top of the mountain. We chatted about exactly how we'd tackle getting to the summit. Bob will go first, as he is a much faster rider. He won't slow down or stop to wait for me, as he usually does when we are on our regular rides, and I am riding more cautiously through a tricky area because there'll be no chance of him stopping on the way. From the campground, there's 2 tight corners in the first kilometre, then 7 hairpin bends closer to the top. The first few hundred metres of the Coree Summit Road are manageable, though riding up and over the table drains on my little bike is like rolling over big waves in a wild sea. While littered with loose rock, I manage the first few corners okay. If they're all like this, I may just get to the top without hitting a rock and dropping Wolfie. But then, higher up, the corners get tighter, much tighter. This is where a specific off-road riding skill, one born of many hours' experience with this type of terrain, is essential, but I just don't have it. I've ridden tight corners before, I've ridden rocky roads before, but I've never ridden the two together, and here's my dilemma. Ride too fast and I risk not being able to make it around the sharp hairpin corners, but ride too slow and I risk not having enough momentum to keep my front wheel in a straight line over the rocks, the bigger ones of which can easily deflect a small motorbike tire like mine sideways. Hitting a big rock will throw me over well before I have time to correct the imbalance. Fear slows me to a crawl. I stall the bike on the second corner but manage to hold it upright and get started again. I stall on 3 more corners until I finally figure out a workaround where I deliberately ride off the corner onto the verge, which is mostly grassy with much fewer rocks, so I can stop, then turn and take off in the right direction. With newfound confidence, I make it to the base of the final assault. I stop Wolfie on the verge to take a breather while I decide whether I can get up this last very steep section. It's the steepest road I've ever encountered in 3 years of riding off-road. For a moment, I think that I will park the bike and walk up, but then I will have lost, will have failed at the challenge. After dithering for what seemed like an eternity, I finally see a possible route up, which I burn into my brain so I don't deviate. I'll need speed and determination and to not throw up from fear in my helmet. Then suddenly it's over. I'm at the top and parking Wolfie next to Bob Somalian, but I can't get off the bike. I thought I'd be joyous and celebrate wildly, pump a fist and laugh, but I can't. I'm paralysed, terrified by the thought that I now have to ride down the mountain, which might be worse. For a moment I console myself with the totally irrational thought that I'll just leave the bike there and walk home. Advertise it to the local off-road riders group as being free for whoever can be bothered to retrieve it. I see Bob getting his camping gear out. I take a few deep breaths and shakily dismount. I'm not sure now how long we spent on the top, close to an hour perhaps. Bob brews a very welcome cup of tea for me and makes a mug of miso soup for himself. I wander around, looking at the hazy view, taking photos, feeling a sense of gratitude that, at least, half the challenge is over. Before setting off on the return trip, I walked down the first steep section, mentally mapping out the least worst route to negotiate. It's important for my confidence to get this part right, and when I was certain that I knew exactly which line to take, we set off, with Bob going first again. Sometimes going down a steep rocky hill can be harder than going up, but to my immense relief this wasn't the case, and riding down was much easier than I thought it would be, although in several of the corners I still had to use my special three-point turn technique. Then, close to the bottom, I lost it in a big way on the second last hairpin corner. Frustratingly, it was actually a relatively easy corner, but I hit a rock at the wrong angle and down Wolfie and I went. Later I realised that I'd relaxed because the hardest part was over and lost my concentration. After I picked myself up, I took off my helmet and jacket and set about trying to pick the bike up. Exhausted from the ride, I didn't have a chance, but with no phone coverage in the area, I just had to wait it out until Bob realised that something had happened to me and came to my rescue. I don't know how long this took, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, during which time I watched petrol leak from Wolfie's tank and wondered who'd get to me first, Bob or the people who'd arrived at the top in a four-wheel drive shortly after we did, and at some stage had to come back down again. In the end, as fate would have it, they both arrived at the same time. Bob picked up my bike and we headed down the last section, back to the Coree campground, where we took another break so I could have some much-needed food and water. Then we headed back along the same route we'd taken to get up there. Coree Road, Two Sticks Road, Curry's Road, Brindabella Road, and then finally the Cotter Road, back to inner Canberra. I'd done it. 2 years in the dreaming, 2 weeks in the planning, and half a day in the making. That afternoon I posted about my achievement on the local off-road riders Facebook page. Within minutes, likes started flooding in. 24 hours later, I had over 150 likes, plus many congratulatory comments. One of the best things about motorcycle riding is the camaraderie among riders, and because of the nature of the activity, this is especially true among off-road riders who see each other immediately as comrades in a joyous battle to conquer the elements, dirt, dust, rocks, mud and water. While I could have attempted this ride on my own, given my inexperience with this type of steep and rough terrain and the remoteness of the trail, it would have been stupid for me to do so. And besides, off-road riding is always more fun in the company of a trusted companion, especially someone who makes you a cuppa when you get to the top of a big, scary mountain. So it's with great pleasure and gratitude that I thank my bike buddy Bob for his help with my third challenge in my Mindset Reset series, and I very much look forward to many more rides with him, though I should add that in one of his post-ride text messages to me, he talked about buying an inclinometer, so maybe he's planning more steep mountain challenges ahead for me. In terms of the cost on the day, this was a very cheap activity. All I spent on the ride was about $10 in petrol, though I did buy Bob and myself a celebratory lunch and coffee after the ride. We went to a fabulous little cafe on the shores of Lake Burley Griffin's East Basin that has an all-day breakfast menu, and we both had the honey-glazed ham hock benedict, which was wonderful. In terms of continuing costs, registration of my XT is $370 per year in the ACT, which is about half the price of my other two motorbikes because it is a much smaller bike. Annual insurance is about $170 per year. Yearly maintenance is about $400 for a full service, although I saved that cost this year as, wonderful man that he is, Bob recently carried out a much-needed oil change on Wolfie for me, with me only paying the cost of the new air filter and oil filter at a total of $94, plus a year's worth of promised coffees. In the next episode, I take on the fourth challenge in my Mindset Reset series, having a professional makeup lesson at Mecca Maxima, so do join me online as I participate in this very different experience. For more information about living your own unlived life, if you go to my website, you can download a copy of my free book, Living Your Unlived Life, Finding Contentment by Honouring Your Dreams. And if it's your thing, you could like this video and subscribe to my channel.